Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, in my recent research of Shirley MacLaine, and I've just gotten another book by her, What If? And God, can it be any worse than reading anything from Shirley MacLaine? It's such new age dribble. But, I don't know if she influenced a lot of people or not, but she certainly is writing and continues to write. She's 87 now, and part of her big realization, and I think maybe it does help people. You got to remember, I am a Gnosis master. I have developed in a very unique and individual way, and other people seem to need to get drug-induced fantasies, follow movie stars, etc. And I guess I should understand that. I never was with the crowd. Now, part of what Shirley MacLaine talked about was the Bodhi Tree. Now, this was a famous landmark in Los Angeles for over 40 years. Started in 1970 by what's typical of Los Angeles. And people don't understand Los Angeles and what it's all about, and tends to see California as the hippy-dippy paradise, which it really isn't. And what's even more amusing is the Bodhi Tree, which is a bookstore and supposed tea house. I don't remember seeing much tea there, but certainly was an interesting and kind of fun, chic place to go in West Hollywood, known for its gay crowd and its actual giant, right next to, or not next to, close to it, was a big design center where different designers used to go to find products, etc. And of course, on that street on Melrose, and of course we know of the TV show Melrose and so forth. So this was the hot West Hollywood location for so many things. And of course, this store opened in 1970, pretty much the height of the New Age, hippy-dippy movement to a degree, or I should say alternative thought. Now, it wasn't really hippy-dippy in Los Angeles, and the founders of it, of course, there are many founders of this particular bookstore, which is basically, one of the problems is that it was a converted house that was taken from residential and turned into commercial. And a few of them in this area were. But what does that tell you about the functioning as a regular retail store? Well, it's a serious problem. Why? No parking. This is Los Angeles, baby. Everybody's got a car, and people don't ride buses in Los Angeles unless you are really the poorest of poor. So the point is, you're not going to get a bus here. People don't ride buses. You just don't do that in Los Angeles in general. So the whole idea is that you can see from the start this was a doomed investment. But of course, it was started by people who had a lot of money. These were rich aerospace people. And of course, Southern California is based on a military economy and a motion picture economy. That's what everything revolves around. California in general is a giant aerospace military-based economy. From San Diego to San Francisco, you got nothing but military bases, aircraft manufacturers, and supports of the military. And of course, most of California, including my family, were hooked up to aerospace. That's where the money was, and that's where everybody moved to. And aerospace would work well in Southern California because you could have open hangars and planes moving all the time because the weather is always good. So everybody moved out there, all of the major people. As a matter of fact, at one time, my father worked for Curtiss Wright. Does that sound familiar? The Wright brothers, Curtiss Wright? Well, actually, the company he started moved, of course, to California and other places. They had different divisions around the country, but this is where all of the major aerospace people work for. Lockheed, Hughes Aircraft, you name it, they all there. So all of these companies were started and flourished there, and this is what built Southern California. While the movie industry was a major influence to a large extent, it didn't really create as many jobs as people think it did. Now, first of all, I want to clarify my position. I've lived in Southern California, from San Diego to Los Angeles suburbs, all of my life. So the whole idea, I've only spent about 3 years outside of Southern California. So I've seen the giant area, and you can kind of call Los Angeles from the Mexican border all the way up to Santa Barbara, basically. This is kind of a giant zone that everybody moves around in Southern California. Los Angeles County, which is not just part of what I just talked about, has 20 million people living there, which is 3 times the population, or 4 times the population of Sweden, Norway, Denmark, etc. All these countries have like 8-9 million people living there, so at least 3 times. So you got to understand, this is a huge area loaded with people. So it's important. So I've spent all my time there. I've seen come and go. I've mixed in all of these different neighborhoods to some degree as an outsider. So I know what's going on. Of course, being a person involved in metaphysics, but now when I got involved in the Bodhi Tree and everything else, I was really past my hoopy-doopy diaper-wearing times. Now, but that's not where everybody else was. Now, Shirley MacLaine talks about this bookstore because it was the main bookstore, or where you could get information. Now, everybody who in this day and age is really totally and completely misinformed of how you get information. You don't understand the processes to get information like it was in them olden days, the 70s, 80s, and 90s into basically 2000. I mean, the internet's really only been prominent for probably, 15, 20 years at the most. Before that, how did you get information? What did you do? And I think it's important to understand this. While I've talked about this in several lectures, I don't think people get it. So if you're under 40, you don't know what's going on. Plain and simple of how the world works. But of course, this is how the world works. The short-sighted, uneducated people that know nothing about anything jump into the world and keep the same criminal people in power. Same old story, and you don't know no different. So you think the internet, people would be going and finding all sorts of different and boutique areas. Well, to a large extent, that's not true. To a large extent, it's the same thing. And people have to understand that everything in life is the same. And it's important you hear it from a gnosis master. No matter where you are, 95% of everything goes to 3%. Oh, what? 95% of the money in Hollywood goes to 3% of the producers. 95% of the money on YouTube goes to 3% of the producers. And I can go on and on, 95 to 3. So that's the way it works. So I guess we could really round that out to 97% goes to 3 if we want to make all the numbers come together perfectly. So what are we talking about? Now, there is a misnomer about California in general, being this hippy-dippy liberal place. And yes, California does things slightly different because of the masses of population who tended to leave the more confines of conservative criminal environments of the back east and central United States, the Midwest, and move to California, as well as the massive influx of Latins that come up from all of the areas, including the massive invasion from Canada by the Canucks. So the whole idea is that all of these things come to the West Coast, and that's why, of course, that's where the first legalization of marijuana and other things happened, and that the entire West Coast, marijuana is legalized recreational. But that's a misnomer again. Marijuana is kind of the red herring of a state that is loaded with military contractors, which is extremely conservative. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. Arnold Schwarzenegger, that little Nazi incompetent leader. So the whole idea is that all these people came from California, not to mention so many other senators, etc. And even though California wields a big bat politically, and apparently California pays more into the federal government than it takes out, so the gossip is. So the idea is they haven't really done much. And while California tends to be a little more progressive, it isn't. People look at California and they think of San Francisco, particularly the Haight-Ashbury hippy-dippies taking drug trips, hanging on the streets. And they've labeled entire California to be Berkeley, California, where it had very radical people, and even to this day has radical people. But interesting enough, Berkeley is a very expensive place to live, equivalent to Beverly Hills. Yes, hippy dippers, thank you for creating a paper zone. Woohoo! Same old nonsense you get from the hypocritical, new age, lying scumbuckets that are just really part of the world. All they do is wear a funny hat because I guess it makes them feel better instead of their usual emblem of fascism, whatever that may be. So the whole idea is we need to fully understand that. So California became labeled with that, but California politics in general is very conservative. Of course, it doesn't meet places like Oklahoma, who has never voted for a Democrat, and they still have their hangings of them black people on weekends, or other places, particularly they're bordering of Texas. So, I mean, certainly you can go to it, but obviously California has this huge difference in diversity. And of course, while they'll have Democratic governors or Republicans, they seem to try and vote for the right person. I voted for Ani the first time as well. The Democratic governor at that time couldn't keep the electricity on. And of course, that was staged by the Republicans to kick him out. But if you're allowing that to happen, you're kind of a weak-kneed. The other things, California used to bus people from their state all over the United States. I used to hear, yeah, you Californians are sending them illegal aliens here to North Dakota and North Carolina. I hear this all the time, of course. It's all California. And of course, the Californians have this horrible, people want to murder them, particularly people from Colorado. Rocky Mountain Highs, we'll kill you. We're loving, peaceful people. So the whole idea is this is what you get all the time. Of course, that's typically American. They want to kill each other while the rest of the world laughs at that as they pick your pockets. So as we get involved in all these things, we need to fully understand that. So this is how the world works, and California is a strange and very different place. California has different climates, very different. Southern California, which is basically a desert, is very different from the agricultural center of California, which is where the food basket comes from and where most of the food in the United States is grown. Very interesting, which is, Bakersfield, these areas, conservative, good soil, but as flat as a board. Then you start moving into Northern California, which is very rustic, giant trees, and all the beaches and stuff in between there. But as you get further north in California, you get more of a forested beach. And the climates are radically different. It's hot and warm in Southern California. Northern California has huge amounts of rain, like San Francisco. So it's very, very diverse, and there's no way really of clarifying. And of course, you have little pockets of people with different realities. So the aerospace industries that are in certain communities, of course, tend to be right-wing. You vote for your pocketbook, not what's for right. That's the American way. Vote for what takes care of you and screw your neighbor. Just like Jesus told me to. So the whole idea is that's exactly what you get. So I think it's important to preface that. And I don't think, like most things, you don't understand what Europe's about. You don't understand what other states are about. You don't know how the country is run. You don't know about Las Vegas. You don't know about Utah. You don't know about nothing but your own little town, which you've been lied to, which is dirty as the butthole of a monkey. So the whole idea is you don't get it. It's Washington that's bad, not my state. So the whole idea is all these things is how it works. So understanding this is important. But what did you do? It's 1970, and still this is a time when there was a lot of openings in philosophy. This is where things are changing. And of course, the Vietnam War, I believe, was still raging. I think it went on until 73, 72. And of course, when you're looking down the barrel of a gun, you think a little different. It's like taking ayahuasca. You got to think different because you have to. But of course, the minute that gun's taken away, you're a right-wing nut job, like most of this 60s generations are, driving their BMWs made by murderers just a few years earlier, talking about helping the people while they stomp on everybody and don't pay their employees. So the whole idea is that this is the reality of the world. So one of these institutions where people use, where did you get knowledge from? And that goes for anybody. It's amazing when you look at today, anytime I have a question, or if I want to know how old somebody is, or where they're from, or just a basic definition of something, or what's that town? You hear about somebody comes from this town, where are they? What's the population? What is the income? Or a country. All you have to do is go to the internet, punch it in, and you have instant information. Now, this was always difficult. What everybody had, if they were a real family, unlike mine, they would have a encyclopedia, usually the Encyclopedia Britannica. What about Funkin' Wagnall? This used to be mimicked on the old Laugh-In show. Anybody remember that? Unfortunately, I do. Is the fact that you would have this book, and it was alphabeticalized. So if you wanted to look up petroleum, well, what is petroleum, Daddy? Oh, you'd go there and look it up. If you wanted to get the population or know about a city, Wichita, what's Wichita? You'd look it up in the encyclopedia. So this is what your home reference was. And there was just few smaller books that people would have around them. The almanac, the atlas, other things. Now, it wasn't just atlases for, of course, you had one for countries and you had one for basic statistics, have things like metrics tables, movie stars' birth dates, the weights, etc. So you had these little books that you had that were references. And most people had these things to look up things, so they had it. But, they're always very dated. And, of course, back in the 70s, well, it had to change. I think 1912. Things are still the same. So the whole idea is you didn't have the kind of changes you have now in population and everything else. You got to remember that the world has been in a run since about 1980. So, keeping that in mind, what do you do about all this? How do you get information? Well, that was the way you got information if you could afford it. Now, encyclopedias were always expensive. You used to pay on it monthly. A lot of people, I think, did. As I said, my family didn't do it. You could buy encyclopedias or volumes of them at your local supermarket for $3 or $4. So you'd go in there and buy A today. Next week, you'd come there and buy B, etc., and you could get a fairly good one. But you should have encyclopedia salesmen, and they would be coming around selling you in. So this was a big deal for many, many years. And I'm not sure what people are doing today. I don't know if these all switched to online or not, but physical stuff is really gone, even though people still kind of hold on to it. It's hard to read a book that isn't physical. I'm moving away from that, but it's kind of stupid. Books are heavy. They're difficult to haul around. If you want to have many books with you, which I've done when different traveling, well, it's a nightmare. You got everything now in your Kindle, and you can have 1,000 books in there and buy new ones anytime you want at generally okay prices. I wouldn't necessarily good prices. But all of that is part of this new way of gaining information. This is new. And all of this stuff really hasn't come to the public in a great way except in the last 15 years, and that's nothing. And it seems to have built dramatically. Music online with Spotify and other things. Well, these have been around for a while, but in mass use and at a high level of quality, it's pretty been new. It's pretty much even down to the last 10 years where massive amounts of this has happened. Before that, people went to things like bookstores and other things, which are now all being eliminated. And they just don't serve a purpose anymore. Bookstores have to modify themselves to survive, and people love to go to this certain intellectual, but the bottom line is that people don't buy there. You're going to go to Amazon, where you can buy it easier and cheaper. And a lot of times, you can get a book at Amazon, which is a relatively new one, which may retail for $15 to $25, but you can get a used copy for $2. Because, books are not a great commodity that people really keep. Only a few go up in price. Why should you do that? Secondly, why not just get a Kindle? Even if it costs you $10 over the $2 book, you have something that's in a digital format that you can carry with you and store for the rest of your life. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing. So, I had thousands of books, and they were really a brick on my back of what do you do with them? And, of course, it's nice to have them around your pub, but who even has time to reread anything? I think that's an illusion for delusional people to think, oh, yeah, I'm going to go back and read that later. Well, I don't know. I don't have any time whatsoever, and I'm assuming most people are in the same boat. Do you want to go back and read the same book? Yeah, I read that 2 years ago. I'm not going to read no new stuff. I want to read that other old stuff. So I'm not really sure what the value of that is. I also use a lot of audiobooks or have the Kindle read to me, as Kindles do. So all of this is a way to get information in and get lots of it in a much more enjoyable way instead of sitting down and reading something, which certainly still is appropriate and nice in some instances. It's not nice carrying on a train if you want to carry 4 books with you, but you don't carry 4. But even carrying one, it's kind of, you still got your Kindle that does this, it's got a calculator, it's got a watch, it's got all these other things. So it is certainly a nice way to go. So, but what did you do in 1970 when I was getting out of my horse and tied it up in front of the Bodhi Tree so I could go in and look at them funny things with writing in them? Well, you got to remember there were no Amazons. Actually, the big department store type things are relatively new, unless you lived in a big city and went to Saks Fifth Avenue, all these kind of stores, which were basically fancy stores. What was popular in the 70s was the fact of that the big Kmarts, which were raging at the time, the Walmarts of their time, and of course they had books and other things, but they were basically discount stores, and pretty much everybody went there to buy common stuff. But you really didn't go there to buy books, because it was difficult for Kmart to stock things. The other thing was the fact that if you wanted alternative information other than the basic novels and the crap that you could get at your local bookstore, and of course there were bookstores everywhere. Let's take that in consideration. Little bookstores were frequently found, and your neighborhood would probably have 3 or 4 of them, a couple of used bookstores, and this is where you got information. You also, of course, had a library, and I don't know how many people use those. I used to use them all the time, being a person doing research, but generally that's what your choices were. This changed, of course, and the entire bookstore industry has been pretty much decimated. Nobody can make money in it. Even though apparently, so I hear in the retail industry, that independent small bookstores are on the rise again. These pseudo-intellectual little yuppie types trying to make a little living in a business that have too much money and too few brains want to open up coffee shops where they have books in them, most likely, because this is the intellectual pursuit. I remember Alice Baldwin stating that, and of course he could, he's worth hundreds of millions, that he'd like to own a bookstore if he wasn't in acting. Well, you can, Alex. Where is it? Well, the point is it's not there. Bookstores don't make any money, and they're certainly labor intensive to a large degree, and there isn't that much money in a book when you sell it. You get 40% of the price, so you buy it for 10, you get $4 out of it if you're lucky, and how long does it take to sell, etc. Probably like movies, a lot of the same book sells, but other ones don't. And what do you stock? Well, you're going to stock New Age occult books? Well, that's not everybody's interest. As a matter of fact, that's not very many people interested. So you have a little section of that. You're doing a big disservice. Well, where can you get everything? The people who run the book industry is Amazon.com. They decide which books are successful because that's where you get them, plain and simple. Bookstores don't. Barnes & Noble, the few surviving of these that are around, are now turning into semi-gift shops where they're carrying all sorts of other things from toys to other things with books thrown in a wee bit. And, of course, I don't know how much they make from their little coffee shops, but, they don't run them, apparently. There's Starbucks in there who pay them a fee, and I'm not sure how that works, but it seems to me that that's a hard way to keep a business going, living off of some percentage you get from Starbucks. So it's a dead industry direct. Nobody goes to stores anymore. The statistical data is that 60% of all alternative books, New Age, occult, etc., are all sold through Amazon. So, and Amazon's not the only online seller, so if we add in that, you're talking about 80-90% of the books sold are sold online. And because there are millions of them, Bezos went into books because it was something that there was so much of. So that was a way of catering to people. Well, I want to read about 1812 agriculture. Yeah, I'm going to find that in your local Barnes & Noble, aren't you? Yeah, that's the hot section, the 1812 agricultural section. Well, Amazon can stock those without a problem, and then you even get past the point of getting to print on demand. So virtually any subject can be offered, and really, what a cheer for that. Let's do that. All of my books are print on demand, and what a great thing that anybody can be published with their opinion and what they want to write about without having to go through snooty controlled book publishers who really do nothing for anybody and never have. They keep perpetrating the same lies from the same losers. Now anybody can do it. So, like everything in life, it gets down to marketing ultimately, but it's nice that if you want to write about something, including your history in Georgia or your grandfather in Georgia who beat his slaves, you can certainly write about that. Isn't that wonderful? So the whole idea is that these are the type of things that this industry is having. So there certainly is a plus. Now let's get back to the old Bodhi Tree. Now, I went to the Bodhi Tree many, many times. I've probably been there 20, 30 times, maybe more. I didn't live near them because I never really lived in that area of Los Angeles. But Los Angeles, if you know Los Angeles, is really kind of all connected, even though people are very confused about Los Angeles and how it's spread around and like to criticize it. But Los Angeles is a great little city if you know what you're doing, but it takes a lot of skill. You can't be in New York and, hey, take me over to Joe's Bar. Well, no, you're not going to do that in Los Angeles because it's a little bit different and spread out. You got to know the city, or you really have to have kind of a brain, which you don't really need to have in Chicago or New York. So, and I guess all these cities have their pluses. I don't really like any cities, but LA's tend to be spread out. You got to know where you're going. You got to know the roads, etc. And of course, you know, like New York City isn't packed. It takes you 2 hours to get 2 blocks. So the fact is that LA is packed as well. Well, it's kind of everywhere. I don't particularly like any cities. But LA you really have to know, and there's little places and so forth, kind of like this bookstore, which is typical. And there'll be a little restaurant somewhere else, and that's typical. But you got to know about these things and how to get there, and few people do that come as tourists or have trouble finding it. So I used to go there often, particularly when I went into Los Angeles for different events and expos, and of course you would get out of dinner or these would be over with, and this was a great place to go in and stop and have a little digestion while looking at their books. Now, the Bodhi Tree was a converted house, which already screams problems. So, of course, they converted it, they pulled out some walls here and there, but ultimately it was pretty tiny. It was a small place with weaving through different rooms, and there just wasn't any space for it. By the time you put a cash register in and some offices for everyone, there just wasn't much room there. They didn't even have a used book section until some other store near them, another house store, closed down, and they took over that little tiny house. You got to remember, this is West Hollywood. These things and this place was probably built in the 30s. And generally they didn't build mansions then. I'm not sure if they do today, but these were small houses, typical Spanish-looking architecture of the 1920s and 30s, and that's what it looked like. While these tend to be attractive, they also tend to be very small. The other problem, as I just mentioned, is they're built in residential neighborhoods. Well, I've never been in a residential neighborhood that has a parking lot in it. You've got driveways and a little bit of parking in front of the house. That's it. Well, that's all they ever had. So the stuck-up little New Agers who bought these places and owned it for 40 years never figured out how to, or in any way, to find parking for their store. Done. But they wrote it out, and it was chic to go there and walk 10 miles or whatever it is to get a parking spot. It was always difficult and annoying to find parking spots anywhere. And you had to end up parking on streets. And I'm sure a lot of tickets were written because there's all sorts of, you're not supposed to park here, you're not supposed to park there. And of course, if you have a house in that area, you don't particularly like everybody parking in front of your house to go to some store that you don't benefit from. So these are all the things. So it was a cute little place, and of course it had that feel of a home, warm and fuzzy. They went where they could. They put little chairs in and little sofas, and they had, the place looked good. And they had a fairly extensive selection of books, but not really that extensive. And of course, if you're Shirley MacLaine, I guess you're bowled over by the books written by the diaper wearers. But, it had a lot of yogi, metaphysical reincarnation books, a lot of pseudo-intellectual nonsense, which, I've already went through that. In 1970s, I was already into other areas, and it wasn't really something that I needed. And of course, you could get those kind of books even at your local bookstore. They had plenty of books by yogis and on yoga and other things that you could buy at your local bookstore, which again, everybody in those days had an independent local bookstore. Usually relatively small, but there also was used. So you could go in your local neighborhood and you probably have 2 or 3 of these to choose from. You didn't have to drive to Los Angeles to get a book on yoga. So, and of course, Los Angeles didn't have as many facilities as you think. Oddly enough, Los Angeles only has one occult shop called Pan Pipes in Hollywood, which is the size of a phone booth. So the whole idea is people again think that everybody's into witchcraft and New Age and all this stuff. It's just not true. Now, different neighborhoods have their own bookstores as well. You want Zen? Well, there's Little Tokyo, there's Little India. So these all have their own little bookstores with their own things if you want to truck around to all these places, use a 70s term, to find this kind of literature. So they were there, and there were a few other major bookstores which are still out there. Alexandria, too, was big out of Pasadena, another location not too far from there, but far enough, which had a lot of New Age books. It used to sponsor the Bill Jenkins show. And I never remember the Bodhi Tree sponsoring Bill Jenkins that I know of. So it just shows you how they lack. They really never, they became a place that people started to have meetings with, which is how bookstores work. So an author comes there, has a signing. Where else do you go? It's oddly enough that Los Angeles, the hippy-dippy heaven, so everybody thinks, didn't have places where people congregated, where people got together and had meetings. So there were your areas, the yogic center, this center, that's, and they all had meetings and did things as well. So it's kind of a misnomer to anybody who knew Los Angeles. But, where was there a universal gathering place for different people? I mean, even the Temple of Set had a storefront, I believe, on Hollywood Boulevard for a period of time, shockingly enough. So, of course, that didn't last like all these things. And generally, anything alternative New Age doesn't last. These people don't support anybody. They tend, a lot of these people have a lot of money, but they're not going to support you. They're going to buy at the best price like they do on Amazon today. They're not going to go to their local New Age shop. They're going to buy on Amazon because they got it for $1 cheaper. And that's how everybody works in this day and age. They're not going to support you because you're kind of on the team. No, when it comes to me, myself, and I, that's all it is. They don't really care about you. And if you're gone tomorrow, well, they really don't care. Don't think anybody does. All they want is their own thing. So she talked about the Bodhi Tree in her book, and then a movie followed. Out on a Limb was her big New Age book where she kind of woke up and figured out, well, there's more than dancing in Hollywood. There's more than having shoes and being the little slut of the Hollywood world. Ooh. So the whole idea is I don't believe it for a second. She ran into different people. As a celebrity, you meet everybody. She decided that she wanted a little bit of change. It seemed to me that my take on her is the fact that she did a lot of stuff here just to get money. Her career was burning out in the 1980s. She was an old dancer. And quite frankly, I don't know. Anybody said that I'm going to go see a Shirley MacLaine. I want to see her dance. I mean, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, I want to see a female dancer. How about Flashdance? How about Saturday Night Live? Fantastic dance movie. Shirley MacLaine was not. She's 90 years old now. This is for a whole nother generation. And by 1970 and 80, when her book came out, particularly 80, she was an old woman that nobody cared about. So she had to do something a little different. And she met New Age people for whatever reason, and psychics and other people. And, you meet these people, and it is kind of fun and amazing. Well, your grandmother did that. Well, you're right. Ooh. Well, I'm not sure what all that means. And then they give you their little New Age values, and she went through this little awakening to ultimately awaken into the same little paper bag and box that she started off in, because very few people get out of that. They think they have. But there's no internal changes. They think a little different for their own personal empowerment. And that's exactly what Shirley MacLaine did. There certainly is nothing there with her. And the same thing with a lot of things. But this was a big time in the New Age, the 1980s. It still was raging. More New Agey was the 1980s. Lynn Andrews, the famous American Indian shaman, or who learned to become a shaman in a weekend course, like so many people. And, of course, I read her books, and it's such kindergarten. But I guess, people need that are just starting off. And I guess that's the perspective that her books and the people she reads to. But, it's so boring when you go to her, and I've gotten another one of her books, and I'll catch you up on her in general. But how self-centered. I mean, you go to her website, and it's Hollywood music playing. Da-da-da-da-da. It's the opening of a Hollywood musical, because that's how she sees herself. She's evolved so much, she's still the dancer at 87, with piles of money she's sitting on, giving nothing to her one child. That's basically what it comes down to. Who was never supported or assisted in any way, and never talks about anybody but herself, really, and her little affairs with married men, and all her other immoral scum way of life that she has chosen, because karma exists, so I want to make sure I'm a real bad girl. So the whole idea is that this is the kind of things that you work. And then, of course, to this day, she's never had a relationship of any real category. She somehow, and I'm not even sure it's even her baby, but I guess it is, kind of looks like her, with some goofball who lives in Japan. How typical of a messed up person. And since then, it's had nothing and doesn't really do anything and has millions and millions of dollars. Keeps making more money writing books, but, where does it go, Shirley? Why didn't you take over the Bodhi Tree and put it in its new location and put $10 million into it? After all, you got that in your pocket. So the whole idea is that that's how it all goes. So the point is, the Bodhi Tree was in. So I used to go there, and it's a kind of a nice, cozy atmosphere. It's not like walking into Barnes & Noble, where you have all these shelves and you got a big building and everything. It was like walking into a house and walking around the rooms, which were loaded with books. So that's kind of cool unto itself. Of course, most New Age stores tend to burn a lot of incense, so when you walked in there, you got that mystical yummy row. And of course, I never failed to see Tibetans in their orange robes running around the place, and for some reason or another, they seem to always had calculators. Remember, this was before cell phones, kiddies. I rode up in me horse. So the whole idea is that they always ran around with calculators, punching in the cost of the books to figure out how much it was in their currency. So I always remember that. Every single one of them had a calculator. So, okay. So I guess it's maybe they weren't smart enough to use paper and pencil, but no, they're smart. They use electronic devices. Oh, let me find it interesting. So you'd find that, and of course you'd find the other people running around, the people in their turbans and other things. And it had a vast bit, but it was very New Agey, spiritual, yogi, Tibetan type atmosphere is what I picked up from it. If you were looking for practical books, now when I started going there in the late 80s and so forth fairly frequently, and then of course stopped, they didn't have anything in practical occultism. I was looking for books on magic and sorcery and witchcraft, and they never had any of that stuff to any great degree. One of the other problems with them is they had very traditional publishers. Yeah, you think that they would be the people that started helping publishers get their books out there. You think they would be stocking books that were alternative. Yeah, I published 30, 40 books. Not one of them were ever in the Bodhi Tree. So the whole were they searching out occultism? Well, no. They were aerospace people giving the same Raji-Maji junk out there. So the whole idea is that I have a problem with that. So don't tell me you're enlightened, you're seeking past when you publish the same people, the same named yogis. Well, what about that yogi from Bengal who wrote a book who can't get it outside of his little town? Well, it's amazing you survive. But, when you have 40 years and you have somebody ringing your bell, and for I understand that Shirley MacLaine and other people were involved in these businesses and that they were on board of directors or something. I've heard this. Now, I cannot confirm any of it. But once she made them a lot of money, she went in there and started, I don't know what. And it's hard to believe that there was any money making there. And of course, you wouldn't get Shirley MacLaine into anything she had to invest in for a higher purpose. If she didn't get money out of it, she wouldn't be there. So the whole idea, and of course Hollywood, which has billions of dollars all over the place, never has done anything to really help the community that I've ever seen. I mean, you have the Hollywood Hills, which are above kind of the main streets of Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood Boulevard, which are basically known for the homeless people, the hookers, the drug addicts. So you go from your mansion, you drive down half a mile onto Hollywood Boulevard, and then you can look at all the social problems there. And I don't think Hollywood has ever done anything. They like to raise money for politicians, but they're an elite that spit on everybody else. This is the conundrum with liberal New Ager types that cry for the world but don't take care of anybody and usually screw their fellow workers, relatives, and everything else over. And I saw this with people directly, even within my family, the crybaby 60 children they were, who just screwed and raped everybody they ever came in contact with. But we got to take care of the world, man. So the whole idea is that wasn't really part of it at all. They're very rotten people, certainly no better than the people they claim to be against. So the whole idea is this is what you have in the entire Los Angeles type area. So they had this, they didn't really perpetrate this. They did become a meeting place, but they never became a meeting place for much more than what is called spiritual stuff. And this means people talking about the same old nonsense. The Rabayamis going there and talking about their wasted, stupid philosophy that hasn't worked for them for thousands of years. But of course, you somehow think that they are enlightened. Based on what? Life in Asia and India? Really? So the whole idea is, this is always the gripe I had, because I'm a person that's a show me person. I look at people not I like to, where you come from, what are you up to? Now people write stuff, but I like, what makes you tick? And when you look behind people, you find out the frauds they are. And the fact is that if this is an enlightening process, certainly India is not very enlightened to spend $6 billion a year on the space program while they don't even have flush toilets. I mean, it's unbelievable. And they've given up trying to do anything. You have caste there and you die in the street, and that's fine. That's how it works. As you're dying, laying in the street there, your fellow people in your town leave you a piece of fruit. This is how it works. And then they'll leave you a little blanket so you can die in the street. That's how it works. Pretty sad in the bigger picture. But when we go into it, I won't go to endless stories I can give you on those type of things, but this is the type of thing. And certainly Asia and the Buddhist communities haven't done much there either. And certainly Buddhism for Westerners is a complete fraud. I've never known an American Buddhist, a non-Asian, who wasn't a scumbucket to the highest degree. I mean, these people are the worst of the worst. So they make born-again Christians look like great enlightened people. God. So Buddhists are American Buddhists of the non-Buddhist category, whatever that means, are the worst. So, and I've been through all this, people. That's why I'm an enlightened master. I see facts, not the illusion that society gives you, that you buy. Isn't that a nice little... It's not a nice little person. These people are scum. So it's unbelievable. Right 5 miles from the Hollywood studios is 100,000 homeless people living on the street in Skid Row. Nobody takes care of them. Well, they're too busy buying their cabins in the mountains or their $300 million films. Nobody helps anybody, and they don't even pressurize local economies who depend upon the movie industry. Well, this is the way the world is. So the point is, the Bodhi Tree had all this, kind of these fun boutique places. If you wanted that kind of, but you can get all that stuff. Everybody found it on Amazon, cheaper and better, and they went down the tubes. But we also remember that they were in business for 40 years. The entire original people were basically all old now. What are you going to run this forever? And apparently they couldn't sell it or whatever happened, or I think they held on to it, gave it to their kid who now lives in a lap of luxury there, and didn't bother to follow through with it. So they could have done a lot of things. They could have pushed for, what's the matter, the Hollywood people couldn't get parking for them? They couldn't buy someplace close as a lot for that? No. That would cost money. We don't want to do that. We're peace-loving, wonderful people. We only take money. We don't spend it. Poor Shirley, you couldn't find a parking lot or buy a house in the neighborhood to use that. No. I don't even pay for my own kid. Why would I do that? So the whole idea is that havens for intellectual expansion, which was so typical and prevalent in the 70s and 80s to a large degree, became a dinosaur. People don't do it. In general, if you got more than 20 people to show up in Los Angeles for any event, it was a lot, unless they were major events, these New Age expos and so forth. Well, they got 20,000 people to show about a weekend. But you're talking about a place that has millions to draw from. People who have meetings there in general, unless you're extremely well known, nobody shows up. It's a little difficult getting around, parking, and I'm not talking only for the Bodhi Tree. Parking is difficult, so people don't show up for anything. And this goes anywhere. Getting around in crowded cities, people don't drive to. It's hard to get around. That's the way it is everywhere. So people don't show up for anything unless it's a big name or a big event like an expo. And there were big expos in LA, the city, and in Pasadena, etc., where they were the New Age things. You brought your books, your products there, and people were doing that. And of course, if you weren't some big name, you were fairly disrespected in these places. And people weren't interested. So I went to one of these and had a modicum response to our radionic equipment at that time. You think people would go for something new, but whatever, they're not. Where's the Robbie Mommy? So the whole idea is, his 8,000-year-old stuff that never worked, around the corner. So it's all crap, and that's how all these things work with people. So don't expect anything to be any different in these areas. So I have no use for New Agers, their crybaby attitudes. As far as I'm concerned, they're all Shirley. MacLaine says, I'm Hollywood, and I danced, and, I met a yogi once. That's everything she said. So it's all about me, myself, and she did a lot, getting one break after another, coming from a middle-class family. And, nobody dances from two, Shirley. You can barely stand up. So that kind of fantasy reality that you work so hard in your life, and you don't work hard when you make it by 20, honey. Just doesn't work like that. So the whole idea is that, and she made sure she got into every possible little niche she could and got a lot of breaks for whatever she did to get them. So the whole idea, including giving $60,000 a month to some goofball who lives in Japan who said he was an alien. We should believe anything that she says. She's a good judger of information. And of course, the Japanese, the brutal scum they are, they were aliens. We don't really know. They're the advanced people. What's so advanced about the Japanese? And we do know, Shirley. Read history. Everything that Japanese has comes from China. It's just a modification of it, from dress to their musical instruments to their writing. It's all Chinese, honey. Didn't come from planet Zargo. And of course, like everything else, they're one of the most brutalist people on the planet, and they have perpetrated their brutality for thousands of years, including the poor Koreans who they massacred by the millions and piled their noses up in piles that went up 100 to 200 feet. Oh, I know that. Well, these are the kind of things you run into. Now, I digress there, but the point is we get back to understanding. So the store closed in 2012. Now, what I find interesting, and I just went to find, supposedly they still have a sign up saying, we're coming back. So get a big lunch, people, for another 20 years, and maybe they'll come back. All the rich babies in LA are not going to put money into a bookstore when they buy all their books at Amazon. They're not going to go into that store and buy anything. Do you really think that happens? Well, not anymore. The celebrities generally don't mix at all. Now, in the 70s, I used to see them in restaurants all over the place. That turned into private rooms. They don't go anywhere, they don't do anything, and nobody really cares about anybody else coming there. So the point is, it ain't going to happen. It's interesting they should still have that. They supposedly have an online bookstore. Well, it's interesting because I just went there as well. Well, if you want books and you can find it, they've got them on below cost. So they are trying to get rid of the books so they can close that store because they're probably sitting on $5,000 or $10,000 worth of books because they thought, the Bodhi Tree is going to sell books. And supposedly there's some sort of lectures and other things that over the years the Bodhi Tree did that are there. And I don't know if they're free or what. I'm not going to spend time going through that. I really don't need to hear another Ramayami talking about the history, and our shows are going to be up, and we're going to live in paradise. Can I have a book? Your wife's ass is nice. Can I have it? So the whole idea is this is what the Rami Mommies do. So these are all the nonsense that goes on out there. So you're not going to find that. Certainly Shirley MacLaine, who got 87 and her God knows how many hundreds of millions. She's living in Santa Fe in a hole somewhere with her dogs. So she certainly wouldn't do anything public to get that going. It was such a change in her life that she made sure she pooped on it and let it die after giving it some life, and no time or money is spent there. Certainly wouldn't be too difficult to buy a building in Los Angeles and put a bunch of books in it. Probably wouldn't even cost that much. Probably would cost her under $10 million to fully stock it up, get it, and everything else. And most likely she'd get her money back out of it. Thinking that they're going to be successful when somebody can click their phone and buy the same book on Amazon, usually at a discount, or maybe even get it used for like $2. So the whole idea is that it's not a very good business model. Now, the people who tried this with their online store are failing, obviously. The fact that there's some name out there, well, it is just a website, and I'm sure that some kiddie owns it or whatever's going on. They certainly are not spending hours filling books and selling them at below cost. So that ain't working. Now, what's going on there, who knows? Getting out information, helping, carrying on the Bodhi Tree enlightenment attitude. Well, that may or may not be a reality or not. I don't know. Doesn't seem to be working. It's interesting, when I punched on the Bodhi Tree on the actual Google search, I got up a fake ad came in on me that you won something, send your name and address here. I think that's quite appropriate, to be honestly. That really what everything's turned into, or maybe the real face of all this pseudo enlightenment, is just a con. And what has it ever done for the world, and what have all these people ever done for the world? And the self-empowerment that MacLaine got and done nothing about it, her being able to travel the world with lots of money, basically not taking care of her responsibilities at home or even bothering to phone call her daughter, her only daughter, is the epitome of arrogant New Age scumbuckets. And that's just the way it is. So it's a fun place. You can't go there if you people want to. If it was still open, I'd recommend people as a tourist attraction go there. It certainly is kind of a fun New Age experience. Where can you go? Now, there are other bookstores in Los Angeles who've kind of taken over. And of course, would they throw their support there? Would the Bodhi Tree go up to somebody else in another New Age store and say, hey, we're going out of business. Let's work together. We'll start another thing. You can take over the tradition. Boy, if you believe that, you're one of the dumbest mothers on the planet. It don't work like that. Were they ever enlightened? Did they really ever care? Or was it really just about money? And has it always been just about money? Well, nobody's come forward to either save them, move them, or reconstruct it in another area. LA is loaded with empty stores. I'm sure they could find an empty Barnes & Noble probably around the corner. Or one of the other many bookstore chains that have went out of business by the hundreds. It ain't there. Somebody could put together a meeting place. Let's not have it mostly that. Let's do the newy thing. Let's make sure we have a coffee shop and a lecture place. And we can bring in new authors. We can sell little books too, maybe. Maybe even at a discount that we buy directly from the publishers, because we got bucks coming out of our pockets everywhere. I'm Shirley MacLaine. And let's not just blame her. There's plenty of other celebrities who are claimed to be crybaby liberals trying to help the world. It goes on and on of these people who claim to do all this stuff. When it really comes down to it, where's the beef, people? I don't see it. George Clooney gave $1 million to 8 friends of his. Each got $1 million because he had nothing other to do. So he gave $1 million to 8 of it. $8 million he had to piss away. And did he give it to people? Did he give it to his maids, his chauffeur, his nannies, some homeless shelter? Oh, no, George. What did you do? You gave it to your millionaire friends. Now that's a true liberal. A true 60s liberal. Now, he never struggled. He made a fortune from day one in Hollywood. One of them lucky guys that the minute he came there, he made money and was able to bounce off his movie star relative, and was one of the few that could make it. But he made it, and made it big time. Certainly. And then cries about certain events, marries a Arabic lawyer who's supposed to be fighting for different international causes. Yet that's what he does. So, don't know what the story there is, but the hypocriteness of this, the hypocrisy of it all is just kind of staggering. So, that's the same old story. So here, the core of this is what? The Bodhi Tree wasn't that great to begin with. It was a cute little relic of an old time in a section of Los Angeles that had a lot of alternative thinking people, particularly the general gay community who tends to support these things better, but it was also located close to everything, as Los Angeles Central kind of is, particularly the Melrose district there. With famous shopping streets and everything else in the Hollywood. So it was a place you could jump to, but people are not going to jump to a place where you can't park anywhere. This is a notorious problem. They didn't handle that. Shirley didn't handle that. Nobody handled that. So they were dying on the vine there. They survived because of idiots who went there and gave them their money, and it was a center to kind of get unusual stuff, but not really. But I guess if you're into reincarnation and yogi stuff, that it had a great resource. Most everything else, the store just didn't have that much in it. Yes, they had a little bit of everything, from practical magic to alternative science. Well, I mean, yes, to a certain degree, but this is where you went and got stuff. There weren't even publications back there that much. There weren't that many New Age, quote, magazines. So where did you go? This was the center, and I'm assuming they made a fortune when they were the few there. The fact is, when Amazon took over, all bookstores are closing now. That's just the nature of any big bookstore. Only people hanging on are certain Barnes & Nobles, which are located in areas where people like to hang out. And apparently, some are doing quite well, surprisingly. But not with books. They're selling lots of coffee and trinkets and other things. So it's one of those enigmas, but where do you go and hang out? Are you going to hang out at the hot dog stand? Well, you go to the bookstore, you wander about, you read stuff, you get free literature there. You buy a coffee maybe. I mean, that's what I used to see in all the Barnes & Nobles, is that, a lot of people were reading books and buying coffee, but they never bought the books. So it's just one of those things. So the whole idea is that, trying to make money off of that is difficult. People used to use, particularly the local bookstores, would go there, look at the book, and then they'd go home and buy it for $3 or $4 less off of Amazon. That's the reality out there. That's what people do. So it's one of those things, and hopefully you've gotten a bigger view of Los Angeles, what's really going on from a person who lived there for 35 years, and all the other things that are connected with that. Actually 45 years with all the time there and the areas around there. You understand what LA is about. You understand what all that is in terms of the false understanding of Los Angeles, that they're so liberal and wonderful. But Los Angeles in general has serious intrinsic problems which have never changed. And the actual movie industry, which appears to be so liberal, supporting so-called democratic causes, is kind of a joke. They want to be involved in government and lean towards the, quote, Democrats, but do they really do anything? Los Angeles is a cesspool of corruption and has been since the 1920s. And when the movie industry was there, there's nothing but horrible corruption. The worst cops, the worst problems with everything. It is a horrible homeless problem that's been going on for 40 years now. What has been done? Nothing. So the whole idea is that there's nothing special about it. Los Angeles doesn't have any great support of any unusual places in terms of, well, this community, this artistic community, it just doesn't exist in LA. There isn't one giant New Age bookstore. There was this, and nobody really supported it. And nobody went in at the end and tried to save it, which could have been easily done. After all, it is only books. They could have moved it. So why not? Well, it didn't. Somebody could have bought it. They didn't. All of the things that happened is that everyone knew this was a pink elephant and it had to be put to death. And the bottom line is that what do you do about all this stuff? The owners of these stores, as it has changed a wee bit from the beginning, have made a fortune with it and are living quite wealthy because of it. So, still own the property from what I understand to a certain degree, unless it's recently been sold to cash on it in the high real estate value in that particular prime location. But all of this needs to be understood if this is very typically the world and very typically Los Angeles and Southern California. So people should get that out of their head of what kind of hippy-dippy things there. This is also where you have extreme, of course they're all over the world, but extreme out-of-control police departments, which the celebrities do nothing about. So this is where Rodney King was beaten half to death. This is where the Los Angeles Police Department has been known to be highly corrupt since 1910. So it's nothing new. So what has Hollywood done? What have the New Agers done? What is all that? Is there more interest there than other places? Well, I don't really know. You know, there's New Age fairs everywhere. Does Los Angeles get more people to turn out? Well, you know, there is 20 million people just in LA County alone. So I'm not sure you can repeat that anywhere. Does New York get the same turnout? I don't know. Does Chicago? Well, there certainly is lots of people in New York, Chicago, and all the other major cities that are interested in alternative stuff. Is it only LA where they turn out? And do they really turn out in LA? You know, after all, you've got this huge population in one little area. So most of the population in California is in Southern California. I believe that's close to 30 or 40 million just in Southern California. You think you would get huge crowds. You don't, because it's too difficult to drive around. So the fact that you get a decent turnout, well, you certainly should with that kind of a population. But here we go again. The Bodhi Tree is fake. What was in there? And the same old story. Shirley MacLaine was at rock bottom level. She was at not kindergarten. She was in preschool and thought it was amazing to think that reincarnation was something unusual. Well, I don't know when I got these realizations, but this certainly isn't something that was difficult to find out about. The concepts of the Eastern yogis and everything else have been going around strongly for at least 150 years at the time of her discovery. And of course, books on this have been around for hundreds of years. So I'm not sure that's the greatest revelation. Reincarnation was part of the Christian doctrine for many hundreds of years, like so many other things that were culled out for whatever decide at the different councils they had to refine all the diverse Christianity. So they had to go in and cut stuff out, so they said. That was what was cut out. So it was part of it, as it is with most things. Most religions are based on reincarnation. People don't understand that. It's ancestor worship, whether it's the Japanese, the entire Scandinavians, all the Nordics. Well, basically that was ancestors. All of the Caribbean religions, it's ancestor worship. So most things are ancestor worship, and this was then changed over to some god to control people. Because if you were praying to your ancestors, you weren't praying to the big king here and giving money to them. So, I mean, that's where everything changed, and people need to understand that. So if you think there's any great enlightenment, any great better services happening in Los Angeles, people being helped more, there are more liberal things going on, well, it just isn't true. Yes, there are certain bigger laws. California runs the auto industry because you got to sell in California if you want to make money in the auto industry. So if they put in certain emission standards, well, you as a car company have to follow it. Just like if you sell books, you have to go through Amazon. Now, the catalytic converter that California converted over to in the 70s cleaned up the air in California dramatically. People tend to laugh at that and say it's shitty technology. Well, it's not. In the 1970s, you could barely see your hand in front of your face. By the middle to late 80s, Los Angeles was relatively clear, considering there's hundreds of millions of automobiles being driven every day there, or at least tens of millions. So this is what happens with all of these things that people have to look into at a deeper understanding. And the Bodhi Tree is just one of these fake images of Los Angeles that people go into. But a lot can be learned from it. Learn the failure of this and the babbling boob Hollywood stars that came out and said how wonderful it is. And in less than 20 years after her announcement, of everything, or maybe it's been a little over 20 years, it is down the sewer, and there's nobody waving their flag, and there's nobody taking it up. Times have changed. Everything has changed. And if you're waiting for Shirley MacLaine to do anything, you're going to rot. As simple as that. There ain't nothing you're going to get from waiting on any of these people, or for that matter, any Hollywood stars that really may throw their actual mouth behind something, but I don't know. Can you name anybody who's done anything of any great extent? And this is one of the problems that, people who give money should be out there making sure it's used properly and setting up charities that really do something instead of working with others. And a lot of people do this and try and help, and we want to give credit where credit's due, but a lot of people don't want to announce what they're doing, which I always found to be very stupid. You should be telling people what you're doing just to notify. Let them know what you're doing, who you're supporting, who you're trying to help. That's all part of the process. And if you don't do that, well, you're doing a great disservice because people think you're doing nothing. So hopefully that's clear and you've given a little insight into the strange, interesting, and misunderstood Hollywood, Southern California culture. Until next time.